Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. As the countdown begins to the end of his first term, President Muhammadu Buhari, by way of standard administrative procedure, has requested for status reports for ministers on their ministries, departments, and agencies. According to a statement by his spokesperson, Garuba Shehu, the ministers have up till April the 24th to submit their reports to the Presidential Audit Committee. We're joined now by Arise News analyst, Dr. SAM AMADI from our Abuja studio, to speak on the end of one term and the beginning of another 4 years, what his own projections are possibly for the next term, and several other headline issues within the Nigerian polity. Sam, good morning.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good to have you on the morning show today. Now, you listen to my introduction. President Buhari has asked for status reports, handover notes, even if, many people will consider this a standard procedure. Do you see the possibility that in his second term, we will have under President Buhari a change, a strategic change in terms of the philosophy of government?
Well, I think there should be. Whether there will be is a function of many dynamics. First, how much? Every government is always captured. The question is who captures it. If it's captured by persons whose ideology or philosophy or even focus is to leave a legacy for the owner of the mandate, then you expect better things. So essentially, the key issue here will be who is going to underwrite the new government. We don't expect presidents to be very smart or very brilliant or too much, very knowledgeable persons in everything, in statecraft, in policy, in administration. But essentially, what matters is who is behind the presidency and who they're going to pick to work for them. So first and foremost, President Buhari has, in my view, changed himself. He dwindled in stature in the last 4 years in terms of general acceptability, in terms of integrity quotient. Not that he did anything wrong personally, but there were several ways in which government control was very weak. And therefore, I think the normal thing to expect is that a man who came to power with so much credibility, and perhaps looking back, we always look forward to say, oh, the new government will do better. Now he has the opportunity to leave a legacy. And in 3 ways, in my view, clarity is critical. The government failed at the beginning by lack of clarity. And that showed in the quality of persons appointed for the initial, you can call them staffers of government. Why is it important? It's important because it sends a signal, a message that continues to resonate. And so that's how people perceive government from the front face, they see at the beginning. My former professor, Ignatius, who was a former Liberal Convention, ran for the Prime Minister of Britain and Canada and lost, advised the winner. I said, look, the first thing you do is to fix politics. And to fix politics, it might cost you second time, it might cost you some political capital. I think the government didn't fix politics. The level of the primaries we saw and the kind of this, corruption, actually, political corruption we saw in the last 4 years shows that perhaps the government erred or the president erred in his first hirings. So the first signal will be to do the right hiring at the first beginning, to re-incentivize and reset expectation and build back credibility so that he can now match it to action. I think the second thing that we didn't see in the first administration is the quality of policymaking was very weak. You see some of the programs, trader money, interventions for small-scale industries, even the ease of doing business projects. They were not really underwritten by a coherent, theory of change. That is missing. There are no proper documentation, unlike we saw, for example, in Obasanjo's first term, or under Soludo, we had the needs document. There must be a coherent explanation of various government interventions showing how they link together to a theory of change, so that when we talk about dealing with poverty, and I think this is what is missing, this government should be a government that focuses more on social inclusion by the pedigree character of the leadership. We expect a government that will differentiate itself from the PDP, so to say, by saying, look, we are a government for small businesses, government for social inclusion, government to help the people. If you like a social democratic government, we didn't see any significant philosophy, coherent philosophy of governance. And that could be because of the contraption that's APC in terms of different tendencies and perspectives that came together to shape APC. So they were half-heartedly pro-big business, they were half-heartedly pro-small business and the poor. So you need to have a coherent policy. And that requires a policy team that is both knowledgeable and somehow psyched to the basic philosophy or intuitively, or intuit what would be the philosophy of the president and the rest of the administration. So we didn't see coherent policy. And at the level of tactical engagement, you know, we saw so many slippages. Take, for example, the war against corruption. The war against corruption was a signal policy. Both in conceptualization, it was narrow, it was totally bereft of theoretical, you know, amplification, because corruption is not just about jailing those who ran the government before. It's about creating new incentives in the system. It's about clarity in establishing how government runs. And at the level of tactical engagement, it's about ensuring that you translate message to coherent action. And so I would think that this government should start not just looking at these reports in terms of program hogwash and gibberish, but also in terms of saying what's the strategy that we deployed in the last 4 years. And strategy is about diagnosis and coherent policy of engagement, and then coherent set of actions that reinforce those diagnoses and the policy guiding policy that you want to use to address that diagnosis. So we didn't see that in the last 4 years. We should see a much more strategic plan of action, a policy framework that's both clear, as well as coherent and consistently.
Dr. Amadi, do you see, so with all of this, do you see the directive to the MDAs to submit their reports on or before April 24th as another routine handover, or do you sense that it is broader than that?
It depends. You know, the government is a little bit of a black box, so you can't be sure what's happening. Now, that committee that's going to audit it is headed by the vice president, and rightly so. So the idea here could be that you should first start with audits. For me, the framework should be first, not just audit these programs in terms of what they achieve, but audit the strategy plan of the government. What is it that government wanted to achieve in the last 4 years? How did they set about achieving it? So it could be routine in the sense that perhaps those documents are submitted in the office of the vice president, maybe some half-hearted look of, open them, go through them, and then maybe find the shortcomings. Oh, we didn't deliver much on this. But that's not the problem of this government, if you ask me. But if those reports could now trigger a diagnosis of the problem, a strategic review, not just about how these programs came short of implementation in terms of their policy plan, but what were they trying to solve? What was this program trying to do? Take, for example, the trader money, for example. Perhaps a very ethical program in terms of the level of poverty and sense of exclusion of some sectors of this economy. But essentially, do you have enough sense of what we call chain link? Are you intervening in a way that you are also intervening in other variables that will ensure the outcome? So the idea is to help these traders have capital to move ahead, you know, what they can call bridging capital, to get ahead of problem. Are you sure that those funds are being enough, for example, and are they being used well? So the kind of audit that should arise from this handover is not just the routine programmatic review. It should be a strategic. So I would argue that first, perhaps you do the audit at the level of the vice president's office and the committee that's doing it. Then you cascade it to a level of a strategic group that's going to ask a question as to see, what do we set out to achieve in 2015? What do we get? You must start from strategy, from saying, what is the diagnosis of the Nigerian problem? What's the diagnosis? Now, this is the second term, so the question would be, what's the diagnosis of the failure of this government? What is the guiding policy for us as government? You must have a certain guiding policy. For example, we want to run an efficient public service that's not just corruption, but efficient. And the idea is that we grow the economy in order to drastically reduce poverty and improve quality of life. That means you're going to mainstream education, health, and other social services into the core economic policy making. But if the idea is to ease of business, go rank up in that index, rank up in another index. At the end of the day, there's no strategic focus as to what is it that the government is going to address.
Let's break this down a little.
So it could be routine or it could be meaningful.
Sam, I'll need you to break this down a little bit. You know, I mean, why should philosophy, theory, strategy be so important to a government, particularly in our dispensation where it seems that, you know, given the rhetoric that we listen to every day, power, you know, is an end in itself. There are leaders in strategic places who have been talking about the winner takes it all, to such persons who are pursuing a philosophy of dominance. Why should the kind of theory of social change, strategy, frameworks, or philosophy that you've been defining, why should it be important to them? Because there seems to be gaps, you know, in terms of ideas, in terms of implementation, in terms of the connectivity, you know, with the people, and dissonance at many levels that we see.
I think you put a hand on it. You call it dominance. I tweeted once that, look, we should move away from the politics of dominance. It's a politics of mastering. Okay, we won the game. Is that an end to itself? Well, maybe to a power drunk or a politician who thinks about power. Winning power is something tangible. So you've won the power. Like the acts during the early days of Russian Revolution. Now we have got a revolution. What do we do with it? What's the plan? What do we achieve? Now, let me put it this way. The president is a second-term president. So essentially, he has two power play games to play. Either he controls power in a way to bring his successor, whoever he wants. So that's an extension of power brokering. But beyond that, I would think that a second-term president would be more concerned with his legacy in history, especially a president who has 4 times, 3 times failed in a way that some significant part of the country feel that he was sustained, failed in a way that people felt, oh, only if we had President Buhari come, corruption will be dead. That president should reasonably be concerned about what he does in the next 4 years. So there is no magic bullet here. The idea is simple. You can't eat a cake and have it. If your quest and your appetite is for power, then you have power. After 8 years, you will have power anymore. Even if you rule 2 years surrogate, next 8 years, power changes. But if you think beyond winning power, and that's the problem. You need power for something. What is it? You need power either to make change, you need power to just get wealthy, or power to punish some people. So I want to be hopeful, like Immanuel Kant says, that I want to hope that there could be practical reason, not philosophic now, why the new government would think beyond power. And this is very important. The last 4 years has been, we've seen a game of ascendancy. We want to take over, win over, National Assembly everywhere. No, that doesn't matter. What matters is actually how you entrench your legacy in history. First time, yes, you might want to play the politics of power to be in the second time. Not second time. You just have to live as a hero, as a statesman. You've been a military ruler, you've been a first-time president, you're not a second-time president. So my hope actually is that perhaps for lack of knowledge, perhaps for distraction, you know, people are distracted by noise, sounds here and there. So IPOB makes noise, or Southeast makes noise, or Southwest makes noise, you get distracted. I just want to believe that somehow the people who commandeer and control this power will be able to know that it's in their own long-term interest to use this power to, it's a win-win. Whatever they want to win, whether it's territorial victory or whether it is, you know, some notional sense of powerfulness, they can get that as well as transform their society. And by the way, the Nigerian state is really bad in terms of look at insecurity, look at poverty. I mean, we are putting it as if this is concept, this is reality. And the idea of a strategy, back to what your quick question, that strategy is critical because anyhow you solve a problem, you will need to have 3 critical things. A clear diagnosis of what the problem is. Otherwise, as you've seen in power sector and elsewhere, if you misdiagnose the problem, if the problem for you is private sector, and then you miss out the whole collapse of the public sector governance structure that will underwrite an efficient private sector, you get bad outcome. So you must have a proper diagnosis of the problem. You must also have a clear, you know, sensible and effective guiding policy. We want to solve this problem through this process. And then sets of coherent and self-reinforcing actions that build up on each of those successes you record in the short to medium to long term.
Indeed.
So I would argue really that I'm hopeful that this government can really rise above dominance and power for power's sake and see a great opportunity to be legends as well as to change the country for the better, and then make sensible the whole 10 million, 12 million, 12 million population that trusts President Buhari. They deserve better than we got in the last 4 years.
You know, President Muhammadu Buhari has talked about inclusive governance since he won his second term. But a lot of people say, you know, that does not necessarily translate to a more pluralistic Nigeria, and that beyond his 3 cardinal promises of the economy, anti-corruption, and security, he needs to first be a unifier. I want to be sure that that's the point we were making the last time. Do you share this view that beyond these 3 cardinal promises, President Buhari needs to first be a unifier, not just the president for the 15 million people who voted for him, and not the president of the APC, but, you know, a president of Nigeria? And then in your own view, what really should this inclusive governance be?
Well, first, I think it's clear that the president should, you know, move. Whether he might actually love all Nigerians, but the body language, some of the actions in the last 4 years, doesn't tell that story well. So he has to tell a different story. And it started well with his victory speech, the speech he gave at the State House, where he used the word inclusion. I think that should resonate. And he went to Dubai during the World Economic Forum for Middle East and Arab countries, and he also used the word social inclusion as his policy. And now it works in 2 ways. At a political sense, social inclusion, political, would mean Nigeria is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, and it's not a misnomer. It's almost becoming the nature of the world. Even so-called monolithic societies are plural in terms of belief systems, in terms of ideas and value systems. So pluralism is a fact of history. So he should first admit that we're a plural society and it's good for us. And therefore, hark back to the methodology of managing a plural society, which is inclusion of identifiable diverse group, for example, Christian, Muslim, some balance. You won't have 100% balance, but some balance. Secondly, ethnic balance. And this is also in line with constitutional mandate. Well, I won't nitpick on the number of ministers, number of parastatal heads, but essentially create a sense of inclusion. Now, at the level of social inclusion, issues about women and youths have been really problematic in the last government. We've seen a decline. And I think the president, initially there were some stories around the president not being comfortable with women, which I think doesn't really make much sense. But the president can now also include more women, more youths. I can understand is being more comfortable with people who are a little bit more mature, elderly. But essentially, running government, you need a youthful energy in the areas that are important. So you need to include youths. And then inclusion also would include in this time, also being more tolerant to those who criticize, people from opposition. You don't need to appoint PDP or YPP into your cabinet, but you need to show that even those who contested against you and those who didn't support you are part of the Nigerians that you are going to lead. And leadership is influence. And so if you stop demonizing, and this is where the party leadership, especially the initial chairman and others, should take note. If you stop demonizing, then you are likely going to be able to leverage on their competence, on their support to drive the country forward. And that's where I think the president should think like a business leader. The whole idea is to achieve your goals. And therefore, you know, getting stuck in the electoral mode is wrong. You should exit that electoral mode and now begin to think as if everybody voted for him. Now, at a level also, you made a point about inclusion also will be economic. I see a lot of, the poverty question is a big challenge for the president. And it provides an organizing principle for government. The president can focus his next 4 years at drastically reducing poverty and enhancing inclusion. That would be a broad, grand team for a government that can succeed. And that will put in the vulnerable, the marginalized groups, including women and youths, and of course the poor. So I think he can structure his next 4 years around the theme of inclusion and poverty reduction. And that would also enable him to reach out to some of the dissidents and some of the parts of Nigeria that are already thinking in terms of separation or in terms of different levels of irredentism. The president can use that team to unleash political energy to mobilize and mainstream those who feel left out of the power calculus.
Sam.
And that's good for him and it's good for the country.
Sam, well, I mean, President Buhari's spokespersons may not agree with you that he's not too comfortable with women, but I don't want to speak on their behalf.
No, yes, I said alleged. I don't think it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, if you say so. But let me ask you, what's your assessment of the cabinet, the federal cabinet that we have had 2015 to 2019? These gentlemen and women who are submitting their handover notes, if possible, ministry by ministry, if you know all of them. And then what kind of cabinet would you like to see from May 29? Should President Buhari retain this same team, or should he do something that is different in terms of his selections?
Well, I think, first, the cabinet is a kind of mixed grill. I mean, we have persons who's entered into that office or into the cabinet can be justified by virtue of what they've done before. So there are a couple of ministers. My best minister would be the Minister of National Planning, Udodoma, not just because of his technical competence, but essentially because of also the level of, there's no dissonance around him. You know, he is the kind of person you want to have. I don't know the support staff around him because national planning is not really pulling the weight the way it is. And I've also argued theoretically that the idea of downplaying national planning and overplaying finance ministry is one of the things that we got from the neoliberal world order that the World Bank has given to us. If you look at the history of development in East Asia, in Europe, even in Africa at the beginning of our growth period, after the colonial rule, you saw that national plan, economic development ministries played key role because essentially it's not about finance and financialization. It's about articulated economy. So I want to see back a strong national planning and economic development ministry. Is critical. You see it in every country that has done something significant in terms of sustainable and poverty-reducing growth. The second point is that some ministers, they really are not fit for purpose. And that brings back the issue of strategy and first, what do you want to achieve? A cabinet should not be constituted, as if you are picking onions, pepper in a market. You have a plan. This is the kind of cabinet we want. This is what we want to do. And each of those, in fact, starting from how you designate and define cabinet, we take it for granted that this nomenclature, the way we have divided the government or the Federal Republic of Nigeria in terms of ministries, ought to be that way. For example, should you have Minister of Information? What do you want to achieve by that? It doesn't mean you should not or should, but you must have to start from ground zero, draw the map. What do you want to achieve? What's the level of government? And you sketch it out clearly so that the way you define ministry, some people argue that it's better to have a Minister of Energy than Minister of Power, and rolling energy and environment. So these are different configurations based on a plan, what I call the theory of change, what do you want to achieve. Some people can even say we need to have a Ministry of Rural Development because of the poverty, heavy poverty and underdevelopment in the rural areas. Those are matters for first starting with a plan, a theory of change and a plan, and then you dimension, intervention, and create ministries. Now, who should fill those ministries? It's determined by two factors. Nobody expects the president to appoint opponents and enemies to his cabinet, or persons he can't guarantee their loyalty. So we take it for given that there will be political consideration, but not big capital letter P, meaning they don't need to be members of a political party. They don't need to be persons who actually voted for you in the election. They just have to be persons you can guarantee the level of loyalty required to deliver the work. Secondly, they don't have to be all technocrats. They don't have to come from, they have PhDs in economics and sociology. They have to be persons who have shown by their track record, their past interventions, that they can deal at the level of policy making and management, which is the role of ministry. They can interpret government policy. They can manage the dynamics of human development and personnel management in their ministries, and they can actually motivate the ministries to deliver on their statutory mandates. That's what to look for. And that's why you see all over the world, there are times that Ministry of Health doesn't have to be a doctor. I mean, sorry to shock the medical doctors. No, it's managing policy. You have experts in those ministries. So the president should put an eye on the managerial capacity, the policy making and interpretation quality of those people, and the ability to inspire confidence in the public. Because essentially, you want to have ministers, they want who the populace or the citizens have confidence that this is a team that can deliver, and then they will engage them. Again, talking about who should be the ministry, of course, you're going to follow the constitutional framework of balancing it across every state should have reputation. But government can also redesign their ministry, that some ministries can be in the presidency. If you have to bring ministers for political reasons, then you can dump them, sorry to use the word, in the presidency to do special things. They don't need to be frontline ministers if they don't have the capacity to drive government. But big point I want to make is this. The cabinet, the most important part of government is what I call the villa staffers, special advisors, chief of staff. They control government. Why? Because the model of constitutional governance we are in requires Section 5. The power of the executive power is in the president. And his chief of staff and his staffers are the key drivers of the policy that ministries are supposed to deliver. So if you don't have people in that cabinet, in that inner room of the president, who have the capacity to design these policies, to manage and monitor implementation, to call back, to show, monitor and bring feedback, to show that this ministry is not delivering, then the government will be disoriented. Because essentially, half of that cabinet will be politicians or those who are, putative politicians.
I know what you mean.
Therefore, it's possible that they don't understand. Yeah.
I know what you mean.
So staffers are critical as well as cabinet
I haven't been there myself, but I'd asked you to do an assessment of President Buhari's ministers, his present cabinet. You've only been able to single out one person, Udodoma, just the Minister of National Planning alone. There's no other person in that cabinet that you think has done anything?
Minister of Power, Energy, Minister of Power has done well in roads, but has not done well in power for two reasons. I think he has skills in execution, technical execution, because he's very fierce in executing. So he has done well in road. If you travel to see that the roads have been, Buhari government has done well. He has built on Jonathan's success on road, and he's done well in road. But I think he has done badly in power, because power is adaptive. It calls for different kinds of skills that I think he doesn't have in that measure. That's my view. So he has done well with road. We've done badly in power, because power is adaptive. Power, the complexion of power, the policy nuances require much more, I think, different kind of skill set. I would argue also that a few ministers, in my view, Minister of Health has done well, perhaps because of the work that CDC has done. I've seen creative leadership at the Center for Disease Control in terms of how they have been proactive, because these are people who understand epidemiology and how diseases manifest. So it's critical to have policy people. They don't have to be PhDs, but policy people will be able to understand and manage, especially parastatals in ministry. People forget that it's more important actually to staff those commissions, independent and transaction agencies in the ministries with high-skilled people, even more, I would argue, than ministries. So health has done well because of some parastatal leads that have done excellently well, in my view. I think, it's like I'm out of ideas and out of names, but I think some have done well, but most have been missing in action, in my view. Petroleum, has done fairly well. At least we've seen some more degree of engagement, but we've not seen quick action in unbundling and reforming the petroleum sector. We've not seen the degree of transparency that we expected from petroleum sector. But otherwise, I think in terms of transaction and competence executed, petroleum has done well. Who else has done well? Agriculture. I think agriculture, perhaps a great man, but maybe age is on his side, and
so is it his age that is the problem, or the age of his
national
ideas?
Security?
I say agriculture, is it the age that is the problem, or the age of his ideas?
Age may overlap. I know. But I think internal affairs has not done well. Internal affairs are not done well, because too much conflicts, too much crisis, we've not resolved them. So defense and internal affairs, I think they have not done well.
Well, with over 20 ministers, and you're only able to pick a handful, says a lot. But let me ask you about a recent news
Maybe it's my problem, my brain.
Recent news in the power sector, I mean, estimated billions would just not go away. A nightmare indeed for Nigerian electricity consumers. The MAPs, that's the meter asset providers, has recently said that consumers will now pay through a service charge for their meters. Now, the whole idea of MAPs was to eliminate CAPME, where the consumers pay for the meters. But now the discourse are saying the consumers have to pay for their meters either before or during, a plan through their electricity. What's your take on that?
I think first we should admit that, look, estimated billing might not go out quickly for two reasons. One, I mean, you have to deal with legacy issues of metering, of course, the incentive of discos to try to cheat when they can. But the critical thing here is, and I've made that point clear, I think, with due respect, I think MAP, perhaps, after many years, we discovered it wasn't a very good policy in the first place. First, we had CAPME, which had the singular advantage of allowing discos manage their network, but take away the decision on metering and give it back to consumers. In the sense that with CAPME, the problem with the sector with metering is two. One is financing, access to finance. If the discos claim, and rightly too, that with the solvency in the market, they don't have the kind of finance, and they have no access to finance in terms of borrowing for the banks or elsewhere to finance massive deployment of meter in the way required by the industry. So customers now provide that fund. And then you take it away from them, the incentive not to meter, by providing for a escrow account managed by the disco and the licensed installer. So what NERC needed to do when we left was to build up by more effective enforcement of that process. But they created MAP, which has the merit of creating a subsidiary market on meter, because it gives some people now access to provide meters and perhaps control that process. But it creates a conflict with discos. So my sense is this, that the next step will be 2 points. While we roll out MAP, we need to recognize that the problem of metering historically in Nigeria is financing and effective regulation in terms of dealing with the disposition not to meter customers. Again, in the tariff we issued December 2015 before I left, that tariff was clear that if anybody paid for meter, after 3 months and not supplied, the person will not pay for electricity anymore. It was very punitive. We left, that was not enforced. So the idea here is, if you paid for meter and the rule says 15 days, which you must be metered after you have paid, then there's no reason why for 3 months you won't have meter. So it would have created a run for customers to go and pay for meter. And then you would have got more people meter because the financial component of that has been taken away from the discos. They're going to give them money. You are crowdsourcing finance. And then we worked with BPP to front load approval so that there's no point about saying, oh, we're waiting for procurement from BPP. BPP certified all our installers, all the importers, and certifies the price. So once they pay money, you are ready to deploy. You don't need any procurement approval from anybody. So that's all we did to ensure that once they pay, you deploy 15 days. So with this new order that says 3 months after payment of meter by customer, not metered, no more bills, collect power, it would have put too much iron rod on the discos, and they will have no more complaint because the financing is coming from customers, not from them. And approvals have been given upfront. So all they need to do is to allow the installer who has incentive because he's being paid to install as many as possible. So I think that that plan is far superior, in my view, to MAP. And perhaps the regulator and the policymaker, the ministry, should look again at tightening the enforcement gaps in CAPME. That's my view. But essentially, NERC has to be the one penalizing discos for not deployment of meter. But you can't penalize them except to provide them with a structured policy framework and incentive to meter. And today, at the market, doing 25% or less, or sometimes 30, 45, it's metering is not going to happen through the finances from the market. It has to be some inflection of funds, either from consumers through crowdsourcing or a special intervention to meter at a scale that will perhaps in 2 years make sure that there's no possibility of asymmetric metering.
Yes, Sam, I mean, it's good to see you defending the metering policy that was introduced under your watch as the head of the Nigerian Electricity Regulation Commission. But if you've been following what has been going on in that electricity sector, the Ministry of Power and even the Minister of Power, both institutionally and individually, have been having issues with the distribution companies, the DISCOs, over tariff, over metering, over all kinds of measures that have been introduced. And one major thing that the Ministry of Power under Minister Fashola has been saying is that, look, these DISCOs are PDP DISCOs. And the DISCOs are saying, look, the ministry and the NERC are failing them at the level of policy. Where do you think really the problem is? And how do you think we can resolve this continuing conflict between the DISCOs and the ministry and the NERC, and to even stretch it further between the GENCOs and the DISCOs?
Well, let's put it this way. First, start with saying there's no PDP DISCOs. We run a prebenda government based on patronage. So if you do a privatization today, those who win it will be those perhaps, in fact, all the business people today are APC people. When PDP won, they all crowded to that place. So those who won the DISCO, at least I can say, NERC didn't do the sales, but BPE did. I think that sales went with a high level of formal transparency, meaning process were followed and the winners got the license. Are they qualified are they the kind of people, do they have enough skills, enough financing to run the sector? That's a question that the answer is, of course, clear from the result. But let's get back to the relationship between the ministry and the DISCOs and NERC. When we were there, we had problems with DISCOs in terms of everything. Tariff, they accused me of reducing tariff to favor Jonathan, which, of course, was big lie because we went through a process. And I felt convinced that it didn't make sense. Today, some of my colleagues, particularly Ayoipo, disagreed fundamentally that I was creating regulatory risk. I said, no, you can't have a utility market where the incentive for efficiency is not there. So if we give DISCOs all they ask for in terms of collection losses, meaning those who didn't pay them, they say, NERC, pay us to consumers. We said, no, come and show us that you made effort to collect those bills. So what we did was to transfer back the risk that the DISCOs can manage to the DISCOs. I think to today, people talk about cost-reflective tariff. There's nowhere in the world where the tariff is so cost-reflective that there will be no gap. What that means is this. As long as NERC continues to allow you to recover what you did recover in this year, in subsequent years, and as long as there's confidence in the regulators' ability to be independent and not delegated by government, the DISCOs will not go to court. In our time, nobody went to court against NERC. They were always coming. We always used to have, I set up bi-weekly industry meeting where we sit for 5 hours solving problems. That's regulation. It's about problem solving. But if today the perception in the market is that the regulator has no full control of the market, that the regulator is teleguided, then utilities will resort to litigation because they have no confidence in the independence. That's critical. What we achieved was that we were independent and people knew that we could say no to policies from directions from anybody, from minister. I fought with all the ministers, and of course I was right, and I stayed on the job because I didn't fight for personal reason. I fought to protect the integrity of the process we were implementing. So I think the problem in this market is that you need to get back to a point where the DISCOs have confidence in the regulator and process their disputes through that process. There will be disputes over tariff. And even in more developed markets, the regulator is quarreling with the utilities over share of tariff. How much should we raise? Because tariff setting is both an art and a science. The science might tell us that it should be X amount, but the art tells us that this is not the right time in which to inflate tariff. Then we provide for under recovery and then give you confidence that we're going to roll it back when things improve. So that degree of confidence, the independence, and the competence of the regulator is critical. NERC has very competent people, I think, especially the staffers. I think what is missing now is the confidence of the market that the regulator is independent, The regulator is in charge of his game, and the regulator will be allowed to do what he wants to do. Once that confidence is back, then these disputes, we come back to the regulator, and he will manage to lay down transparent process defined by law. In fact, this market is better managed by what we call industry annex panels, panels made up of both DISCOs, GENCOs. So I think in the interim, what we should do is to look back, audit the independence and the processes of the regulator, especially in relationship to the ministry and to the DISCOs. There should be less dependence on the ministry. That's clear. The Ministry of Power cannot run the regulatory details of a market. It incents risk, and of course, it actually enables the DISCOs to flaunt the powers of the regulator. And because the ministry has no capacity, process, tools to penalize, because it's not the market regulator, then the man who has the power to penalize through cost and through financing is the one who has no power to really effectively intervene or threaten the DISCO. So in a bid perhaps to exercise control over the landscape, over the power landscape, you have unwittingly undermined the regulator and unwittingly empowered the DISCOs. That's why you see this level of, if you like, DISCOs are disobedience and dishonest in the sector. And of course, they are reaping from it because they are no longer, they're going to court and tying down disciplinary process against them, and therefore leaving the regulator perhaps in a difficult situation to effectively take charge of the sector.
Well, now that you mentioned courts, let's talk about politics a bit. It's hard to keep up with the rhetorics from the sidelines of the Presidential Election Petitions Tribunal. I mean, it's Cameroonian, it's servers being hacked, it's bringing in Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, just name it. It's qualification, education qualification, all of this that we're hearing. This isn't the first time we are seeing a presidential election petition. President Muhammadu Buhari himself has challenged the results 3 times before finally winning the elections. But what do you make from all of this coming out from this particular Presidential Election Petition Tribunal?
I think first we should admit that this is going to be a highly politicized trial. Perhaps this will be the first trial, constitutional trial in Nigeria in terms of election that will have high political drama, and rightly so. You see, and this is where I think the PDP, both parties should now think beyond just the legalism of this trial. They should think also about the political drama around it. The idea that President Atiku, Vice President Atiku is not a Nigerian is perhaps a fair legal point for APC to make. Reading the Constitution literally in terms of Section 25 and who is a citizen by birth. And by the way, there's a confusion in public discourse around it. This is not a question of it's not a Nigerian. This is a question of not a Nigerian by birth. Now, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, you cannot be a president of the United States except you are born in the United States or a U.S. citizen by birth. Maybe you might be a U.S. president by naturalization, or you are born outside the territories, like Trump and co. wanted to stigmatize Obama. So the idea of only those born, and we saw with Omar Bongo in
Gabon,
in Ivory Coast, I think.
No,
in Gabon, around the issue. Omar Bongo, around this issue of his paternity, whether he was actually fit to govern. So that's a legal argument to entertain. But then, what complicates it from a constitutional law point of view, incidentally, I teach constitutional law, is that if you look at the 1960 Constitution, the definition of who is a Nigerian differed. Anybody born in British colonies and the Commonwealth would be a Nigerian citizen if his parents were in the Nigerian territory. So you could say by 1960, the classification of Atiku and his family was different. 1963 was a different constitutional framework on who is a Nigerian citizen. 1999, a different one. Now, the question for lawyers would be first, of course, the Interpretation Act says that whatever, any right incurred that accrued in previous existing law, which includes the Constitution, does not become void when the law changes. So if you have got accrued right, meaning this is a right that pertains to me at this point, then you cannot lose it because the law has changed. So that would be an arsenal, a defense arsenal for article people. Secondly, is people who may argue contrary that, well, who is a citizen is as defined by the existing constitution. So it depends on the legal argument that happens at the tribunal, at the Supreme Court later. But then the policy of it is also that it's a shame on a country like Nigeria, and that leaves us with issues around citizenship. You see, I do some research around citizenship and economic development, and we discover that countries in the world, the way they define their citizenship, both in terms of law and in terms of policy engagement, determines the level of economic and socio-economic development. So if today in Nigeria, our citizenship definition is too archaic, now look at that place, it says those whose ethnic group, community, or ethnicity are indigenous to Nigeria. What's indigenous to Nigeria? So the constitutional definition of citizenship calls for question the need for us to change fundamentally this constitution. That's the first takeaway from a policy or political / academic point of view, is that the constitutional definition of citizenship itself is not modern, it's not progressive, and needs to be revisited. But from a legal point of view, I think the article team will have enough argument to meet that defense. So I don't want us to take it too much as if it's a parody or as if it's a needless tackle. It's part of the strategy to win this election. Now, the issue of IBM, I was very pleased when I heard article team say they're going to deploy IBM experts. Let's make it clear. This trial will run on high tech. It's a trial based on system. Credibility of system. If PDP's argument is that they want this election based on data on the server system, APC should prepare to meet them on that. So there's no proposing the idea of IBM and bringing technology. That's what's going to play out in this trial. We need to now begin to, because we're going to migrate to a full-scale digital voting, both in terms of votes and in terms of results. So we are now test running how we develop, how our law, the Evidence Act, and other aspects of our evidential procedural law, we now we live up to a time when trials will not be based on ICT. So essentially, I look forward to a very interesting trial. This will be perhaps a very explosive, politically explosive, as well as digitally explosive trial in the history of this country. And it's good for our democracy. It's good for the Buhari presidency if at the end of the day the Supreme Court restores them, because it gives credibility. And now, of course, makes it difficult for people to rig election. The cost of rigging election, we should put high cost to rig election. So when you rig election, you know that you're going to meet very difficult challenge at the tribunal, not just prosaic case, they go read section 5 says, no, we're going to make it difficult so that people will feel that, look, the system will catch you when you rig election. So I'm looking for a more rigorous, highly well played out adversarial trial, because it's good for the country, it's good for the government after it has been endorsed by the Supreme Court.
Sam, let's talk quickly and briefly about Imo State, where you showed interest in the gubernatorial election. You are now currently a member of the transition committee set up by Emeka Ihedioha, the governor-elect. Now, you talked about inclusive market development in one of your presentations at the transition committee. How much of that, really, can you get in Imo State in the light of the disruption of the last 4 years? And then on a lighter note, maybe you want to respond to the report that Charlie Boy, also known as Area Father, says he has relocated to Imo State to agitate for quality governance. And many people from your part of the state, are saying, where has he been all this while? He didn't lead a protest against Rocha Sokorocha. It's now that Emeka Ihedioha of the PDP has won election that it has occurred to Charlie Boy to relocate to Owerri. Quickly.
Well, interestingly, let's start with Charlie Boy. I went to Charlie Boy to Owerri. I was part of, I did a major presentation of the citizen charter, which I authored, the citizen social contract for citizens, which we unveiled in Owerri after the one we unveiled in Abuja and Lagos. So I'm the policy advisor to Mumudondo, Charlie Boy's outfit. But the point is that Charlie Boy actually, when we are fighting roaches, the human rights groups, in the civil society group in Owerri, at some point Charlie Boy was part of our initial meetings, but of course he didn't play a key role on the street. But now that he feels, perhaps it's part of his disenchantment with Nigeria, perhaps it's also a form of going back to the roots. I know that he has always been keen about politics in Imo State. That's sure. He has been keen about mobilizing the people. But I think at the last meeting we had on Friday, last Friday, where Charlie Boy was overwhelmed by the level of acceptance by civic groups in Imo State, and he felt really challenged. And he told me that, look, Sam, he's going to stay back to organize and to kind of shape up this growing civic engagement. And I think it's good. We failed in Imo State, and I was making that point, that we failed because we allowed Rochas a lot of room to maneuver. Now, Ihedon has come with a great plan. His first moves have shown commitment to change the narrative. He's done the right thing by appointing a committee, but even though in my view it was a bigger committee that was necessary, I'm a member of that committee, but his challenge will be three things, I think. One, he has created unintendedly a sense that it will be business as usual because some of the politicians are all backing. It's good to have them because it gives you political support, but it undercuts, perhaps, the narrative of change. Because, you see, you have to be skillful in managing huge political capital and managing drive for change. I think that's why he's going to be trapped, because if you tell these guys we are all in together and you're telling them government will change, how? There'll be a problem. So Emeka now have to find a way to really create a smaller group that would ruthlessly drive change. Change is going to be ruthless because change has to deal with destroying, dismantling the old order. And as a very fine, good politician, and this is where good things can be bad, his political instincts might work against the technical instinct that requires to move Imo forward. And I just hope that the guys around him will be alive to this challenge and do the right thing. So far, I think Imo is going to be trouble because Rocha's government, first, there are no processes, no documentation, so you're going to basically imagine, reinvent, or kind of imagine things. And in terms of, I'm a member of the policy review, project review team. The question is, what are you reviewing? You need to have some documentation about projects and then have a sense in which you can review them. But now what we're doing is we're just fishing and trying to reconstruct what is from what is not. So basically, it's a big challenge governing Imo after Rochas because you are dealing with what looks like a void, but more than a void, it's really a chaotic void. And therefore, Emeka's position is very, very unenviable. But he can get it done. He has the human resources. Imo is talented. If he continues to show humility and engage in a strategic way, I think he will get it done. For Charlie Boy, I'm supporting him in his engagement in Imo. So let him go on. We are with him.
Well, thank you very much, Sam Amadi. Thank you very much. We've enjoyed our conversation with you this morning very much. It's time now for a short break on the morning show. When we return, we'll have Arise News analyst Emmanuel Efeni join us to review top stories in today's newspapers. Stay with us.